Hi everyone, welcome to another video in our Let's Talk About It series. Today's guest is Dr. Sunit Jadav. He is an assistant professor at Symbiosis College for Women. He is the creator of Jadav's Academy, which is an online learning project using YouTube and Instagram to deliver educational content to today's students about anatomy. He did his MD in anatomy from BJ Medical College, Pune, and is currently pursuing his PhD. He's also a singer and songwriter, and all of his work is available on all the digital platforms. Today's video is about learning how to learn, so let's talk about it.
Thank you for joining us today, sir. Let's dive right in. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, Parvathy, thank you so much for having me. I've been observing a lot of Instagram channels appearing lately that are speaking more about academics, especially when it comes to medical education. And it only makes sense because all our life we've been told to stay away from the phone and stay away from social media. But if social media starts becoming like this, then when people are scrolling through things and there's like a little video on how to learn, like that's a topic that is very close to my heart. Or suppose there's a small little story or an IGTV video or a reel on the muscle attachments of the clavicle. Now I speak from an anatomical perspective because that's what I teach, but it's so nice to just constantly keep, recalling a few things in random order. Maybe you got taught clavicle 1 month within entering medical school, and 6 months down the lane, you're at neuroanatomy and you're just scrolling your Instagram and something about the clavicle shows up on your Instagram and you're like, oh, I'm quickly going to revise those attachments. Wow. Within 3 minutes, you just quickly had like a little, recall thing. And repetition is supposed to be boring or is considered boring, but not anymore, because in social media, now have the ability to, have this nice sensory overload of information. But if some of it also has an academic perspective, you're just kind of making yourself smarter and revising while scrolling through your phone. So thank you for inviting me on a platform like this. This is something that I'm extremely passionate about, and I've always been an advocate. In fact, I keep on telling my students that, listen, you guys can keep your phones on, and if there's anything that you need to share with me, we can stop in the middle of a lecture and you can share something, because this is the way the millennial mind is going to be consuming information. Social media. Let's try to make it an educational one. That's all. Thanks for having me.
Okay, let's dive straight into the questions. So the first question I have for you is, what is learning for a medical student?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. Now, if you Google the term learning, the definition of learning says it is the process of acquiring a new knowledge, understanding, skill, behavior, values, attitudes, and preferences. Now, I think there's a lot of rote learning that a medical student has to go through anyway. So I don't want us to use the word-to-word definition. And let's just try to understand for a medical student what exactly would learning comprise of. So I kind of thought this through last evening, and I realized that there's a couple of modes of learning that might not be as beneficial to medical students as they might be for an architect or an engineer or a poet or a writer. So I thought, let's just try to dissect learning into smaller counterparts and try to understand what are the key elements of learning that a medical student should be familiar with. So I request everybody who's watching this video to actually grab a pencil and paper. Sometimes I like doing it the old-fashioned way. We have PPTs on the screen all the time. So I sometimes force my students to write it down, because I'm sure that is a more better way of, creating a better stronger neuronal connection. So I'm going to talk about 5 R's, and the first R is actually repetition. Now face it, whether you like it or not, for a medical student, repetition is going to be key, because there's a lot of things that need to be remembered. And one of the most important ways of doing that is just repeating it all the time. Which is why I always tell my medical students and eventually clinical practitioners as well, unfortunately in this profession, we do not have an off time. You could be having a lecture in the morning and then maybe you're having a conversation over dinner with your student friends. And you have to have that one little prick who says, oh, by the way, can you remember all the 5 relations of the pancreas that we did today morning? And then someone's going to be like, stop being a geek. But you know what? If you want to be a better student, you have to live the lifestyle of a medical student. And the lifestyle of a medical student largely depends on constantly revisiting the same things that were taught a few hours back, so that this short-term memory gets consolidated and converted into long-term memory. Association, I think, is one of the most hallmark features of intelligence, and we underestimate it in our education system. So there you go. Point number 1 is repetition. Point number 2 is relation. Relation is exactly the same thing that I spoke about earlier. Associating one thing to another. Looking at things that are non-anatomical. That's what I tell my students. Look at things that are non-anatomical and try to think of what anatomical structure does it remind you of. I'll be sharing a couple more examples towards the end, a couple of slides from my lectures, so you can get into that later. Point number 3 is routine. As a medical student, you cannot be dependent on inspiration to hit you to study. You can't be looking at the sunset saying, wow, what a beautiful sunset. I'm just going to sit here for 2 hours and wait for me to get inspired. No, bro, you're not a jingle writer. You're not a musician. You have to choose what is sometimes painful and uncomfortable over pleasures or just enjoyment. You know what I'm saying? I think a life well lived often involves trading short-term pleasures for long-term stability. And a medical student, unfortunately, has to face that truth a little more earlier than the others. You know what I'm saying? So point number 3 is routine. Have a proper routine. Now, I'm not going to go on and on about routine because you already know what routine is. The problem is to follow it. We'll speak a little bit about that later. Point number 4 is rationalism. Now, this is now we're kind of entering the whole philosophical territory from medical education. But as a medical student, if very early on you do not understand the importance of rationality, if you let your emotions take over, then your performance will be affected not only as an academic learner, but also as a clinical practitioner. Let me give you an example. Suppose you are just going to enter the OT and you hear some bad news, whatever it could be. And you can't just break down over there and say, oh my God, somebody else's life is dependent on your hands. And philosophical and filmy though it sounds, unfortunately, that's the truth. So you need to learn to feel emotions, let them come and go, but not react to them at the time of your performance. Now, this is something that comes with practice, right? Finally, I think point number 5 is reflection. I think medical students should take the time out, if not on a daily basis, at least on a weekly basis. For me, I usually tell my students Sunday evening sunset. That's when you reflect.
That's such a great way to put it, right? How to learn. It's like simplifying it into something we can understand, something so basic. That is such a great answer. Moving on to the next question. Is rote learning and memorization important, or is it just a passive process aiding to short-term memory?
Right. Okay. That's a good question. There has been a lot of blowback about rote learning, with people saying that rote learning is only for short-term memory and it does not build long-term concepts. But I'd like to beg to differ a little. Not that I'm propagating rote learning in any way. I'm one of the torch bearers of thinking and establishing deeper neuronal connections through association. But let's face it, in the realm of medical education, there are situations which require of you to speak in a pattern that is already set out for you. There's a bunch of intellectuals who thought that this is the way it should be said. And you could call it like a little traditional or a little bit of cultural scenario, but there are certain things that need to be said in a certain way. And for that, I think you should stick to rote learning. But hear me out before I complete it. I'll give you a very cool example. Causes of splenomegaly. Now, somebody who's liking fancier words is going to kind of, remember some of the Niemann-Pigs and Gauchers or whatever that is called. But bro, hold on there. If an Indian clinical examiner asks you splenomegaly, the first thing that you have to say is point number 1, malaria, because malaria is the most common cause of splenomegaly in a country like India. So assuming that you're going to be practicing in the country, that's the first thing that should come to your mind as soon as you see a patient. So as a medical student, we like to be a little more exotic about things, because that's youth, I guess. We like to have experiences that are slightly, different, so that we can kind of try to make that cultural statement that we are a little different than the others. But amidst that, if you kind of stop leaving the whole rote learning principles that are very much a part of medical education, we might get into a troublesome viva or something. Lastly, eventually rote learning with a number of repetitions does contribute to long-term memory anyways, right? So I think certain things need to be said in the pro forma that they're given in the textbook. And even if it takes you 4 readings or 5 readings to go through that, I think if you want to maintain that image of being a medical student who really knows their stuff in and out and in the right order, I think rote learning should be an important process of a medical student's learning.
That's a great answer. Like how you said, if you think splenomegaly, you think malaria. I think there's a phrase for that. If you hear hoofbeats, don't think zebras, think horses. So I think that's the best way to put it. On to our next question: how to fight procrastination, maintain consistency, and recognize and fight burnout.
Wow, that's a lot of things in one question. So let's break that down to. I think we'll break it down to 3 subparts. Let's first quickly talk a little bit about how to avoid procrastination. You can't completely avoid procrastination, but let's give it a try. The second thing was it about burnout? You said
Consistency and then burnout.
okay. Consistency is point number 2, and burnout is point number 3. Cool. Let's break it down. Let's go to point number 1. How to avoid procrastination. Before I even start speaking about procrastination, I wanna give a little bit of hope for the procrastinators out there. Myself being one of those people. Leonardo da Vinci, one of my biggest heroes, was a hardcore procrastinator. I recently shared it on my story on Instagram as well. He took like 28 years to complete one of his most famous paintings. I'm not sure if it was The Last Supper, but whatever, I could be wrong. But the whole cool thing about this is that a person becomes a procrastinator for 2 reasons. First thing is he gets distracted very easily, tangentiality, which is a very common feature of creative people. And the second thing is he's not really interested in doing that thing. It makes him extremely uncomfortable. So let's break these 2 elements down now. The first thing is, if you think you get distracted very easily, it's great to try the practice of Pomodoro. If you want to know more about Pomodoro, I'm going to link in this description a course that I recently took that really changed my outlook about learning. It's called Learning How to Learn by two neuroscientists called Barbara Oakley and Terence Sejnowski. So Pomodoro is essentially concentrating or fixating yourself intensely on something for 25 minutes, keeping everything aside. Keep that phone upside down, put it off, get on flight mode or whatever. Tell your peeps, like whatever, your co-workers, in case your roommates and all, say that, listen, for the next 25 minutes, I'm not available. And just get to it. 25 minutes of focused learning, and then you can take that break. Make sure you put an alarm or something that works. The second thing you got to do is that, especially this now kind of merges the second part also, how to be consistent. It's always good to attach a reward to the end of your 25-minute Pomodoro session. Third point is falling in love with the process instead of the product. So again, in this same course, there's a lot of that is spoken about, but to keep it very simple and minimal right now, if you kind of fall in love with your style of studying, then you're going to wake up in the morning and look forward to doing it again, right? When you fall in love with the process, eventually the outcome does not matter anymore. Like, you are so in love with the concept of studying the way you do that it doesn't really matter if you get a certain amount of grades in your exam, because you're like, okay, I mean, I got this, but you know what? I had a blast, bro. So I'm in for this. You know what I'm saying? So that is a process over product. And yeah, I think that kind of sums it up. The first 2 halves of the question. Then point number 3, which is the middle part of your question was, what was it again? Maintaining consistency. Am I right?
Yeah, maintaining consistency.
Yeah, again, maintaining consistency kind of comes with the whole process over product thing. And I think a reward is definitely going to help you to be more consistent. If you try these little tiny rewards, as I said, maybe it helps you to kind of, for me, it's TV, because I'm a huge fan of television. And the last part of your question is how to recognize burnout or how to fight burnout.
Both recognizing and fighting them. If you could tell us a little bit about
Great. Sure. So recognizing burnout is not a very difficult thing, because you kind of, if you go through like a nice streak of remembering things or doing something cool, and you feel very like happy about, oh my God, I finished this chapter today, or I finished these 3 LAQs today, blah, blah, blah. And then there comes a point of time when you're kind of reading something that is maybe just as complex or even simpler, and you still find yourself distracted. The first thing I tell my students is, if you find yourself straying away, make a note of that. Whatever notebook you have in your hand, just draw like a little time stamp and say that, oh, you know, I just kind of shifted away. Now, every time you're in a lecture, or if you're having a study session, you can actually track your progress by the number of times you tend to lose your attention. only because that gives you a lot of insight into your own process. So when you're having those Sunday evening reflections and you start seeing a trend, oh, looks like Monday I was distracted like 3-4 times. By Wednesday, it seemed that I was distracted only once. Oh, looks like my peak concentration is nice midweek, yo. What's happening over there? So figure out the things that are easy, keep them for days when your mind gets a little more in the weekend vibe. And when you're at those peak concentrations, for me, it's usually Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. These 3 days are my boom. Monday, I'm transitioning from that Sunday. You know what I'm saying? So Monday, I'm taking it a little easy. So that's one important thing. I think you should kind of be a little more like ductile and malleable and flexible or whatever in making your schedule to understand how things go. Lastly, I always keep on telling my students this, that life is not about having a great brain. It's about understanding your brain greatly. So if you spend enough of time understanding your brain, this is a personal approach, your days of peak concentration, your daily time of peak concentration, your diurnal variation, whatever, your study time, is it in the night, is it in the day? If you can figure that out and you can now understand how to apply the schedule and its differing intensities or whatever of conceptual understanding and superimpose them with this understanding, I think what you get is a very nice hack of making sure that you're making the most of your brain power, right? So I think students should do that. And if you ask me how to fight a burnout, my first answer to that is going to be, don't fight a burnout. You don't have to fight a burnout. If you're going to fight a burnout, you're going to get more burnt out. So that's just wrong vocabulary. You need to understand the burnout. You need to sense it. Okay, that takes a little bit of wisdom. You need to sense the burnout. And once you sense the burnout, you need to patiently wait and take yourself to a parallel or an alternative universe. There are ways of doing that. There are non-illegal ways of doing that. One of them is a beautiful TV show, dude, because if you're in a TV show, and this is, the kids love TV shows. Like when I was young, there was no Netflix. That's probably why I ended up becoming a doctor. If there was Netflix, no, I would not have been a doctor. I would have dropped out in second year saying, bro, why would I do that when there's such amazing TV shows and stuff like that? So point number one is a sensory experience that is completely alternative from a different universe. And point number two is good sleep. So if you could kind of get good sleep, especially REM sleep, because REM sleep or the whole theta wave sleep is what actually leads to creative insight. Point number three, just have a conversation with a friend who is not from the same field or discipline as you are. Dude, this thing can get trippy. If you have a friend from school who is now an architect and you just sit on a video call or a call with her and just say that, hey, listen, tell me a little bit about what your assignments are like. Suppose she says that, oh, I just did a visuospatial task test where it's called as MRT. It's a mental rotation test. Dude, you got to check this out. I'm going to share that link. If you go through that MRT test, you'll realize that it's a test which kind of challenges you to think about what a structure would look like in a 3D space. So it's a test, and I'm going to link one pre-test below in the description. Just go and take that test, because if you take that test, it's damn interesting. I don't know. Have you ever done that? Have you ever done a visuospatial task test? Oh, dude, it's damn trippy. It's called an MRT. It's mental rotation test. And there's just like a paper with some folds on it. And then the question will be like, what would the same paper look like after rotating 90 degrees? And you have to really think. And this is kind of something that is important for visuospatial cognition, which is important for, I don't know, like pilots and architects and stuff like that. But bro, if I tell you that this kind of IQ could help you in understanding anatomical relations, especially of the abdomen, you'd be like, yo, bro, bugger's making sense, because there is a lot of rotation that happens in gut development, right? This is an alternate universe, but you're still thinking. So now you're not just a typical geek, geeking out on that book anymore. You're trying to understand somebody else. And I don't know if medical students get too much time for this, but exercise for sure. If you could do 20 minutes of high intensity interval training right beside your bed, it's damn chill. Just YouTube high intensity exercise, high interval intensity exercise, 12 minutes. And within 12 minutes, there are some really cool exercises that get you started. So what's happening is now your athletic intelligence is being demanded, so the blood is now on your athletic movements instead of the brain. That's a great way to go away from a mental burnout. And then you have a physical burnout, but the physical burnout can still, get you in nice deep sleep. And then you wake up in the morning back again with a nice mental reinforced energy. So yeah, exercise. So sleep, Exercise an alternate universe. That's how you fight, or rather cope with an emerging burnout.
Thank you, sir. That is really valuable insight, and I'm sure there's a lot to take from that information you shared with us.
If you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel, and also don't forget to follow us on Instagram at RC Medicrew. Bye!